Well, joining me on the News at 10 to throw more light on the issue is the Managing Director of Cowrie Assets Management, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. I want to thank you so much indeed for coming on the News at 10 at this time. What are your immediate reactions that we've seen, just as I just read out there, to the latest GDP numbers showing further deepening in the economic recession that we're currently in?
Well, I expected that we're going to see a further decline in the GDP because the structural challenges we have in the economy have not been addressed. But the good news is that the non-oil GDP is beginning to recover. I mean, we saw 2 quarters of non-oil GDP decline. For the first time in 3 quarters, we are seeing an increase, though a marginal increase of 0.03%. But it also gives the government the opportunity to look at the sectors of the economy we need to address. What we need to address is basically address the issue of oil production. If you look at the challenge we have oil production, we had a decline in oil production to 1.63 million barrels per day, compared to 2.17 million barrels per day, which we had in the 3rd quarter of last year. So the major challenge we have is that oil sector, which accounts for 90% of our foreign exchange earnings, have declined, and that decline is manifesting in the manufacturing sector and trade sectors. So you also see shrinkages in the manufacturing sector and the trade sector because of the impact of drop in oil production. Is
this in any way related to the key driver of the economy being recording contractions such as the ones that we've just seen?
Yes, you see, if you look at the structure of the Nigerian economy, like the National Bureau of Statistics said, you have to understand the Nigerian economy, you have to understand the Nigerian economy from the perspective of oil economy and non-oil sector, the oil sector and non-oil sector. The oil sector, which, like I mentioned, accounts for 90% of foreign exchange earnings, but only accounts for 8.1% of our GDP, shrank by 22% in the 3rd quarter of this year. But because the oil sector accounts for 90% of our foreign earnings, the impact of drop in oil sector have manifested in several other sectors. The manufacturing sector, the trade sector, and these 2 sectors, the manufacturing sector accounts for about 9%, 9 to 10% of our GDP. The trade accounts for about 50% of our GDP. Both of them shrank because of lack of effects. So, and if you look at the sector that shrank, there are also manifestations of the drop in crude production. So the government has a job well cut out for it. And I think that should be, how do we address the issue of attack on oil pipelines? So that how do we address the issue of militants in the Niger Delta? Because the greatest challenge we have today is the oil sector production. If we can address that, because we are seeing recoveries in the oil sector, then obviously, if we can actually see a recovery in the oil sector, we should be able to see a recovery in the not too distant future.
Now you've just said, let me just take it out from your mouth there, in the not too distant future. So what do you forecast for the 4th quarter of the year 2016?
Well, based on the available data to us now, I want to believe that the 4th quarter of 2016 should actually still see a decline in GDP. The recovery we saw in the non-oil sector was driven principally by the agriculture sector, which grew by 4.54%, and the telecommunications sector. But you also saw that virtually all other sectors, apart from the likes of financial services sector, all declined. So, and the beauty of what you have seen is that we're beginning to see the effect of the interventions in the agriculture sector. And for me, policy leaders in the country should also take a cue from why is the agriculture sector growing? Because agriculture sector is actually enjoying, one of the few sectors enjoying funding from the central bank as single digit. So it simply means that if we can actually direct funding to other sectors of the economy at relatively low interest rates, we may be able to begin to see recoveries in other sectors. But unfortunately, that's not what is happening. The intervention we are seeing in the agriculture sector is manifesting in growth of that sector. And the other sectors are deprived of liquidity. And therefore, you are seeing shrinkages, contractions in those other sectors. So 2 things the government should take away from this is that we need to address the issue of militancy to improve the level of production in our crude production. And then we also need to find ways of injecting liquidity to the economy so that we can trigger recoveries in other sectors, because the only sector that is getting Development Finance Initiative funding, which the agriculture sector, is beginning to manifest a recovery.
Okay, so if I may just come in there, what do you consider as the short to medium term imperatives in getting the economy back in recovery mode?
Well, we have to restore liquidity from two sectors, from two segments of liquidity requirement. One is FS liquidity, and second factor is local currency liquidity. So we must find ways of assessing on-lending facilities. I've mentioned the issue of improvement in crude production, but beyond that, in the short term, the government must, just like a country like Egypt has assessed a $12 billion support line from IMF, Nigeria need to assess on offshore line to support foreign currency liquidity in the economy. Two, we must find ways of injecting local currency liquidity in the economy. That could be by way of reducing the cash reserve ratio, which is currently at 22.5, or also reducing the monetary policy rate. Those we need to do to trigger recoveries. Because unfortunately, the federal government, the fiscal end of the government does not have the wherewithal to inject liquidity that will lead to recovery.
Mr. Johnson Chukwu, of course, the Managing Director of Cowry Assets Management, we do sincerely thank you for sharing your thoughts with us on the news at 10.